Good evening and welcome to the virtual venue at Pitch HQ. We're broadcasting live from Bonville Road in Brislington, right in the city limits of Bristol. Now, I'm Johnny and my company's donating the studio to the young people tonight for this broadcast. And within our mission statement, we have a concept which is use our resources and privilege to create change that's bigger than us. Tonight, we're doing that by donating our studio. But much more impressive than that is the young people who tonight have organised this mayoral candidate debate. Not only they organised it, wrangled people like us, they've got volunteers down here to produce it. Most importantly, they've managed to get all 4 of the mayor candidates down here to have a chat about their view on climate change, sustainability, and the future of Bristol. You've seen enough of me, now it's over to some amazing young people led by an awesome chap called James Bennett.
Hello, and it's so great to have you here at this debate today run by Avon School's Eco Network. We are a group of young people from schools across Avon working for a sustainable future. My name's James Bennett and I will be your host for this evening. I'm also joined behind the camera, as you can see over here, by 2 producers, Sophie, who is our front of house producer, and Eleanor, who manages our social media. Other people who have helped with preparing for this debate include Matty, who's here with us, Muna, who's not here today, Oliver, Jack and Queenie, who's also with us today. And of course, our wonderful mentors who are also with us today. This event is also organised in the run-up to Earth Day, which is on the 22nd of April and is this Thursday. And I want to thank all the candidates for coming today. By you attending today, it really sends a message to the young people of Bristol and further afield that you are listening to them and that you have their interests at heart. With us today, we have Marvin Rees, the current mayor and Labour candidate. We also have Dr. Caroline Gooch from the Liberal Democrats. We have Sandy Horth-Ruthven from the Green Party and Alistair Watson from the Conservative Party. So before we start, we have some introductory questions. So I'll start with Caroline. And the first question is, did you arrive by bike or electric bike today? And are you wearing anything upcycled or from a charity shop?
I actually came quite a long way. It was a half hour in the taxi, but I came by Uber that was electric.
Very nice. Okay, we'll now go to Alistair. Did you arrive by bike today, or are you wearing anything upcycled?
I would quite often arrive by bike, but today, because this is a little bit far for me to come, I've used my electric car, which I've had for a number of years, and so I used no carbon whatsoever to get here.
Apart from the grid, of course. It's as clean as the grid. But
well,
yes.
Well, I've got solar panels, so.
Oh, good. Oh, very good. Okay. Sandy, did you arrive by bike, electric bike, and what are you wearing that's upcycled?
Yes, I did arrive by bike, cycled. I actually live in Brislington, so not too far away. And this jacket is a second-hand one from a friend.
And Marvin?
Yeah, I arrived by bike. I'm not wearing anything upcycled.
I can confirm that they did both cycle.
I might not like it, but...
Brilliant. So now the reason this debate is taking place is because in 2016, in the Bristol City Council elections, only 44.76% of eligible adults voted. Now surely democracy is far too precious for just 44.76% of us to be part of it. On top of that, we have the climate and ecological crisis. And these candidates for mayor will be judged on how well they deal with this. This is surely the elephant in the room when it comes to this election. So now the candidates have all been asked to prepare an opening statement, which we respectfully ask is no longer than 1 minute. The statement will be answering the following question. Why should the people of Bristol have confidence that you will be the mayor to tackle the climate crisis in our city? Marvin, would you like to start us off?
Am I addressing to you? Or?
Oh, you're addressing it to the camera, and there is a...
Yeah, thank you very much for the opportunity. So I think we can have confidence because we are actually doing it already. Over the last few weeks, I've visited housing developments around Bristol with ground source heat. There's hydropower coming to the city. We've also, just across the road here, just released Brislington Meadows from plans for housing. But it's not just isolated projects, it's what we've done. We've built the whole city plan around delivering the sustainable development goals. And underpinning that is the ecological strategy and the climate strategy. So we've rallied the whole city, not just Bristol City Council, but the whole city to delivering on climate change and the ecological emergency.
Thank you, Marvin. Sandy, would you like to start us off?
Thank you. So let's be clear, it was the Green Party that brought the motion to declare the climate emergency a few years ago and to reach net zero by 2030. So the climate crisis and climate change is in our DNA. So whether we're looking at building houses, transport systems, looking after our parks, it's climate change that is at the heart of all of our policies. And the job of Mayor is to actually take that policy and get things done, to really make change in the city. It's where the rubber hits the road. And just to tell you a little bit about my past, back in the mid-90s, I led, and with some other people, a campaign to stop an incinerator being built in Avon and instead to persuade the City Council to invest in the curbside recycling scheme that we have today. And that's one of the reasons why Bristol has one of the highest recycling rates in the city. So it can be done. If you elect Greens and go green, then you can make real change. So I have that track record, we have the passion and the expertise to really tackle climate change and reach our net zero target.
Thank you, Sandy. Alistair?
Yeah, thank you very much, and it's nice to be here, and it's really good to speak to the young people of Bristol. As part of the older generation, we certainly have quite a job to do for you guys, and to make sure that we do improve the environment over the next 10 years or more. Today was a good day for the environment because the Conservative government announced plans to increase or to reduce the time it's going to take to achieve their targets of 78% reduction by now 2035. And I think this has got a good impact on Bristol because this will mean that it'll make things more achievable. Bristol can't do this on its own, and I think all of us would agree that to decarbonise the whole of this city is a huge job, and to do it by 2030, we now have a bit more of a chance because of the Conservative government.
Thank you, Alistair. Caroline?
My background in science, where's the camera, sorry. My background in science equips me to deal with the climate crisis. Throughout my career, I've done my part for the planet. I reused plastics during my PhD and autoclaved, washed and autoclaved where I needed to, and instead of using fresh plastics every time. As a scientist, I'm evidence-led, and that's why I'm proud that the Liberal Democrats in Bristol are proposing ambitious plans for tackling the climate crisis. We're committed to building a tidal power generator in Bristol, retrofitting homes, dedicated cycling lanes, and rolling out electric car charging points and more. But decisions in Bristol about the future of our city and the future of our planet should not be solely down to one person, and that's why I want to scrap the mayor. The system puts too much power into the hands of one person. Instead, we must prioritise local democracy, which is essential to the climate crisis, which requires everyone working together to ensure that nobody's left behind.
Thank you, Caroline. We now have a question for Marvin and Alistair. Firstly, Marvin. Small changes are easier, quick wins. Long-term plans are more ambitious and may provide greater change. Which of these two routes do you plan to go down?
Well, we're doing both.
Okay.
The immediate wins we've had, for example, in Alderman's Moor, if you go to those homes, they're ground source heat. I was just up at Hartcliffe just the other day, 103 homes up there, again, ground source heat pumps coming through. We've got the City Leap coming through, which is £1 billion package of energy transformation that will decarbonise or transform Bristol's relationship with energy. But beyond that, going back to a point that was made earlier on about national government announcements, we've also been a city that's on the forefront of wrestling with the reality that we will not meet our targets. COP will account for nothing unless we decarbonise city systems. Decarbonising city systems costs billions of pounds, and we've been involved in creating really innovative financial vehicles that will go on 10, 15, 20-year journeys that reconceptualise, replan and rebuild cities so that they are decarbonised. So we have to do the immediate thing, but we have to do the long-term thinking. It's the absence of long-term thinking and visionary leadership that's left us with the crisis we're facing today.
Amazing, thank you. Alistair, will you go for short-term plans or long-term plans?
I think that we've got to do both, and it is important to get short-term wins under our belt, but this is actually a long-term plan that we need to put together. If I am elected as mayor, would review the plans that are in place at the moment to become zero carbon or zero net carbon by 2030 is a real stretch. You know, there's huge amounts to be done there. It will take a lot of work with the central government to do it, and those are big plans that need to be put in place. And of course, you know, we all want to do the same. We want to put in heat networks. We want to use ground source energy. We want to improve the active travel that we have in Bristol. We want to reduce the carbon footprint of all vehicles. So there's a lot to do, and it's a huge and big plan, long term.
Thank you. Now a question for Sandy and Caroline. Sandy, what will you do as Mayor to make sure that schools are as sustainable as possible and produce the change makers of the future?
Thank you. It's a good question. In my past, when I ran the Friends of the Earth office, we went out into schools to talk about environmental issues and raise awareness of those things. I think actually the sort of thing that you're doing today, we need to encourage this. It's you guys who are at the forefront as young people of tackling climate change. We want to hear your voice. So getting your voices out there, one of the key things I would like to do is have a committee for the future. So there is a youth council already. I would like to make sure that those young people get a real say on the big changes that we would want to make in the city, to make sure that you have a future to look forward to, and really hear your voice and make sure that you have a say in the future of the city.
Thank you, Sandy. Caroline?
Sorry, what was the question?
Sorry, I'll say it again. Okay. What will you do as Mayor to make sure schools are as sustainable as possible and produce the change makers of the future?
Okay. Well, firstly, the schools themselves, the buildings themselves need to be sustainable. So we need to make sure that new schools are built to the highest possible eco standards and that older schools are retrofitted. If we can add solar panels, that would be great. The schools need to provide secure bicycle parking for students so that students have the option to cycle, e-bike, e-scooter to school. And the main thing is that we want to have a citizens' climate assembly, and I'd want to ensure that we had teenagers on that as well, so that we actually had the views of the young people taken into account.
Thank you. Now questions for Alistair and Sandy. Alistair, what are your thoughts on redistributing funding from climate harmful projects to more sustainable projects within Bristol City Council?
I certainly would redistribute money if there are some climate harmful projects on the books there. We do need as much money as we can. I don't know what you might think are carbon harmful, but certainly we need to look at what our budgets are and try and move as much money. We also need to unlock money from the private sector, but we've got to be very careful there. I'm a little worried about City Leap, and if I was elected mayor, I would certainly be reviewing what those contracts are. There's quite a bit of worry about bringing in some of the commercial companies, just as we saw with the Bristol Energy Company, that we can lose a lot of money if we're not careful.
Okay, so what about investing in certain things? So I'm sure the council has shares in certain companies, about the Avon pension fund as well. Would you try and move pension plans or the banking from the City Council away from fossil fuel investments?
I would like to, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that's for sure, because I've moved my own investments into
Okay,
that.
thank you. Sandy, will you redistribute funding from climate harmful projects?
Yes, absolutely. So we've already put forward a motion to divest funds from the Avon Pension Fund, which is where the biggest issue or the biggest investment in fossil fuels is. But also there are other things. I'll give you an example. That the West of England budget has tens, potentially hundreds of millions of pounds put aside to build a road around the south of the city. It would go through greenfield sites. It's the South Bristol Ring Road. I would like to repurpose that funding and work with the West of England Mayor to repurpose that funding and put it into public transport in the city. That way we're reducing car miles, reducing carbon, rather than creating more.
Thank you. So for the viewers at home, the energy mix refers to the combination of energy sources that make up our energy grid. This can include renewables, such as solar and wind, and also non-renewables, like gas and coal. So now a question for Caroline and Alistair. What will you do as Mayor to make sure the energy mix in Bristol is as clean and affordable as possible, specifically in relation to the rise of electric vehicles, including electric cars, buses, bikes and scooters?
Okay, so what we really want to do in Bristol is harness the power of the tide. We're sitting on the second largest tidal range in the world in Bristol, and we really need to make use of it. By building an Avon barrage, we would also be protecting the centre of Bristol from flooding, and that would give us a lot of renewable energy. The other thing we'd like to do is have a look at lagoons on the Severn Estuary, and also the fact that we're living in a we've got the Severn Estuary, and we can create energy from tidal power, means that we could actually look at creating a hydrogen plant. So we could be then powering our buses and our transport from hydrogen. We do need to invest in electric vehicles in the short term, because hydrogen vehicles are a little bit further away. So we need to put in car charging points in the city, but we've got a shortage of parking spaces as it is. So we need also to bring in electric car clubs, so that you can get away from the need for everyone to own a car.
Brilliant, thank you. Alistair, how will you make the grid as clean as possible?
I think we are really at a tipping point. That 10 years ago, we used to talk about wind power, and we said, you know, it could be a small proportion of our power mix. And look at it, you know, over Easter, I don't know if anybody else has a look on the climatedashboard.co.uk, but we used we didn't burn much coal, and wind and solar and a bit of nuclear was virtually everything that we used. So it was a renewable mix. Now, the issue is that then the following week, when it was quite cold, but it was a bit sunny, but there was no wind, then of course, you know, things went the other way. It's a difficult mix, and I would agree with Caroline that there's a lot of different solutions there, and we need to look at energy from all different sources, because we can't rely purely on wind and solar.
So can you tell us specifically what you're going to do, though?
Well, as Mayor, I mean, we will do as much investment as we can in wind and solar, because that's really within our gift to an extent. But we do need perhaps nuclear power as well, and I would certainly be in favour of the nuclear fusion plant that may go ahead north of Bristol.
You think we can't just use batteries instead?
Well, from what I've read about batteries, there is not enough batteries in the world, or we couldn't make enough to actually the ability to store that amount of power that we would need. Because, of course, as Caroline says, we will need more electricity, not less, because we will be powering electric cars. You know, everybody that wants to move around will be using electricity. So, you know, there's a huge amount of electricity that will be needed. So I think battery power, from what I understand of the science, is that it's probably not a goer. It will be in the mix, but it's only a small amount.
Okay, thank you. A question for Marvin and Sandy now. Okay. According to a document on Bristol City Council's website, there are 300 extra deaths per year attributed to toxic air in Bristol. In order to deal with Bristol's toxic air, how are you going to expect people to use public transport more? What incentives or strategies will you offer to change people's transport behaviour? Marvin.
Yeah, so we were actually over at First today for a visit, and it is a huge challenge, particularly because of COVID and the reduced capacity of the buses to take people, and a natural nervousness that people are bringing forward now as well, in going into spaces where there are crowds of people. But we continue to I'll go that way. We continue to verbally encourage people to take public transport as we go, and for 16 to 25-year-olds in apprentices and students, we are going to be working on making sure that they get free transport on our buses in the immediate term. But what we also need to bear in mind is that as we're thinking about Bristol's dependency on energy, we're not just planning for a city of 466,000 or so as it is today. Bristol's going to grow by about another 100 or 90 to 100,000 people over the next 25 years. So our plans today have to cope with a bigger city, a larger population, more people moving around. That's why in our whole spatial planning, one is they must be wrapped around delivering the global sustainable development goals, but it also pushes us to look at delivering housing more densely, centrally, where people are actually within active travel distance of main employment, retail, and entertainment venues, so that increasing population does not come with increasing stress on our transport infrastructure.
Thank you. Sandy, what are you going to do to incentivise people to travel sustainably?
So thank you. The key is to start with young people. So we will make bus fares half price for all under 21s. I would challenge respectfully the Mayor who's talked about zero or low price bus fares for the last 5 years. There's no financial plan for that. There's nothing that's concrete that actually says how that's going to happen. We will introduce a corporate parking levy, so that's a charge on car parking spaces in big offices that would pay for half price bus fares for young people. I've already talked about repurposing, investment in roads. Potentially the South Bristol Ring Road would be enough to put in a whole new metro bus set of routes similar to the ones that we have now that have already reduced car use by about 19%. So I think it's important here that we look at really concrete actions, whether the plans are there rather than just promises that sit in the air and don't get delivered.
Thank you. Now a question for Marvin and Caroline. Marvin, are you happy with the clean air zone to be implemented in the centre will be sufficient to deal with Bristol's poor air and the deaths it causes?
Well, there is a test on that, and it's a legal test, because we are under not just a moral responsibility, but a legal requirement to deliver compliant air at legal levels in the shortest possible time. And the clean air zone, as it's currently designed, which is a small area CAS D, will deliver compliant air qualities by the end of 2023. Having said that, it's been a point we've been making since the beginning that we think the clean air zone is a very blunt instrument. We made the case to government from the very beginning that we were concerned about the impact potential charges would have on households and businesses. Unfortunately, the options we experimented with, busgate on Bristol Bridge and making sure that Bolton Street wasn't available to private cars, the modelling says it would not deliver compliance in the shortest possible time.
Is the busgate enforced? I see a lot of cars. I went past there the other day. The bus
They'll get fined if they do.
Will they? Okay.
Well, I made a mistake of driving down it myself, and I got a fine.
Very honest.
So it is enforced.
I just got a fine today.
Yeah.
Came through in the post.
There was a period of time where we gave people a time to adjust to it, but now it is enforced.
So they'll learn.
Yeah.
They'll learn. Okay, thank you. Caroline, slightly different question for you, but on the same topic. As Mayor, will you expand the clean air zone, and or what other actions will you take? How are you going to enable more people to cycle, to use scooters, e-bikes, and how are you going to implement, or are you going to implement living neighbourhoods?
We might expand the clean air zone. It has to be workable for people, so we probably look at it slightly differently. We would definitely, we want to build a green corridor along the M42. There's definitely really, really bad pollution around there. So anywhere where there's a lot of pollution, we would look to put a green corridor in because trees help a lot. We actually want to plant 500,000 trees a year in the Bristol area for the next 10 years. Then we also want to introduce workplace parking levies and fund public transport improvements to reduce congestion. So things like under 25s bus pass, and we would like to have segregated cycling lanes.
So how much would they get off the bus, sorry?
Sorry?
How much you had under 21s bus pass? Is that free bus travel?
It was under 25s, it should be free.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then we would like to get a lot of, the segregated cycling lanes on all the sort of major arterial routes. And then you could use e-scooters, e-bikes and bicycles in those. And then, what else? lots of plans. And obviously the car club schemes and things. Oh, and park and rides. More park and rides, definitely, and park and cycles as well. Because at the moment, you can't go to a park and ride and cycle from it because the bus doesn't get its bus fare. So we want to be able to change it because some people would probably like to cycle on a sunny day and use the bus when it's raining.
And how are you going to get the bus companies on board?
We'd have to work with them over how the pricing works, maybe pay to park instead.
Okay, brilliant, thank you. Now a question just for Alistair. Given your party's position nationally, which until recently was in support of a coal mine being opened in the run-up to possibly the most important climate debates in our lifetimes, it wasn't until intense pressure from various activist groups and organisations were applied to the government that the decision to call in the debate to national government was made. So given your party's position, why should we trust you to enable Bristol to deliver a world-leading response to the climate crisis?
That was a PR disaster for the Conservative Party, I would say. One thing is that a mayor of Bristol is somewhat independent from the party. You know, we're not talking about being whipped as MPs are and so on. You know, this is meant to be an independent position, so we can take our own decisions here in Bristol, and we don't have to do everything that is. So I'm not saying that we would build a coal mine in Bristol. However, when it comes to that so-called coal mine, it was mining coking coal for the use in steel making. And actually, it would have reduced the carbon footprint of the steel making. But, you know, I'm not, you know, making any excuses that it was an absolute PR disaster because it was a coal mine is being built. But it would actually have been used in coking.
Okay, but you could have gone electric.
At the moment,
in
you
that
can't
plant.
make steel without that type of.
You can. There's a plant that's happening in America.
Well, yes. I mean, but those are, you know, experimental and they're
No, it's a fully functioning mine plant, I'm afraid. Okay, Dr. Caroline Gooch. Given your party's campaign promise of scrapping the role of mayor, how will Bristol City Council be able to lead on dealing with the climate crisis?
Well, there would still be, I mean, whoever gets in will have to serve 3 years. Sorry. Whoever gets in will have to serve 3 years in the job, whether there's a referendum or not, and whether people vote to scrap the mayor or not. So that's 3 years in which we have to make a change. I can't believe we are talking about this now with the point of no return bearing down upon us when I was angry about this in the 1980s when I was a teenager. So it's urgent that we get 50% of short car journeys cut in the next few years. So that is the thing that I, or one of these guys, can do. The next thing is that even once we get rid of the mayor, if we're able to do that, there'll still be a leader of the council, and they'll still have the job to actually lead on this, and that should be a major focus of anyone for the next 10, 15 years.
So why exactly do you believe we'd be better without a mayor?
Because it's not democratic. At the moment, the council don't have any say. The council can make decisions and the mayor can overrule them. And we've seen this happen with the arena. So we have one mayor who decides to build an arena, and the next mayor, because he didn't sign on the dotted line, the next mayor came in and said, no, we're not going to have it there, we're going to have it somewhere else, despite a unanimous vote in the council to build the arena in the centre of the city where everyone in the city could access it.
Okay, Marvin, would you like to respond to that?
Well, I think the arena would have been a financial disaster and an environmental disaster for the city. First off, the only way you can have an arena built on that particular site is by borrowing £160 million to build it, and when you haven't dig a hole yet, so it would go up. If we'd have built the arena, we would now be in possession of a £160 million plus building that we couldn't open, and we'd be making our debt repayments on that. We'd also have a venue that we estimate about 75% of customers would be driving in. It's also been impacted by the clean air zone. And to build an arena from scratch, rather than using a repurposed building, we know the numbers now because we got all the estimates, would have cost about another 20,000 tonnes of CO2. So the carbon capture in the Brabazon hangars actually saves us from an arena that would require the production of tens of thousands of tonnes of concrete and steel and the transport of those products as well. So I think it would have been a financial and an environmental error, to put it mildly, for the city.
Sandy, would you like to respond?
Yeah, I'd like to respond to that. Because I think what we're trying to do is plan a city for the future, a city where people don't have to drive. So where the arena is likely to be now up in Filton is very similar to Cribbs Causeway. People will drive there, they will have their Wetherspoons pub pint, they will go to their gig and they will drive home. They will not see Bristol or experience Bristol. The local businesses in the city centre that could have benefited from the arena being in the city centre won't benefit. People in the south of the city won't get the jobs that come from would have come from the arena in the city centre. So I think it's a strategic mistake. And if we're talking about climate change, we have to design cities that are easy to move around in a way that doesn't involve the car. And putting it right next to Temple Meads, our biggest transport hub in the city and in the region, that was absolutely the best place for it. Okay,
Alistair, do you have any thoughts on this project? What would you do if you were mayor currently?
Yeah, I think it was a great error of judgment on Marvin's part. He took this decision, he was mayor. He spent quite a lot of money and umming and ahhing about it over a number of years before deciding that we should have it out in just on the boundary with South Gloucestershire. I agree with everything that has been said by the other people here. I think that it would have been a great jewel in the crown for Bristol, for the city centre, for our businesses and the transport systems that we have. And so, yeah, I'm very sad that it's not gone ahead.
Okay, we'll move on. Marvin, in the current climate and ecological emergency, surely airport expansion is a ludicrous decision in the face of our dwindling carbon budget. Marvin, why were you initially in support of this? And am I right in thinking you've changed your support on that?
Well, I think there are a lot of questions to be answered about, because the aim is actually to reduce the amount of carbon associated with flying. And we do that by, the prospect of innovations in flight, or the reducing the number of people flying, reducing the air miles. So my point is, if it's a very local decision, and by the way, it's not a Bristol decision, it's a North Somerset Secretary of State decision, there's some politics being played around that. But if it is simply a local decision, then absolutely against the expansion of Bristol Airport. But there is a question that, if we can just take a deep breath, There is a question, if we could take a deep breath, needs investigation. And it's one I had with some national climate experts the other day. And it's this, that at the moment, we got stacks of airplanes circling around Heathrow waiting to land. So the question is, could we better use our national network of airports to get planes out the sky? So the rationale is, we've got planes waiting to land in Heathrow. The runway's at 99% capacity. 100 miles down the road, we have a runway at 50% capacity. If we wanted to stop those planes circling while they're waiting to land, would we make a decision to redistribute those flights between airports? And therefore, that would mean different numbers of passengers running between different airports. Now, granted, it would not be good for the local situation. But in terms of participating in a global effort to reduce the amount of carbon associated with flying, it could be part of the solution. Now, my sole point is that those kind of questions just do need to be investigated. It's very easy just to say no expansion and lose sight of the fact that actually what we're trying to do is to reduce the number of flights and to make sure that we reduce the amount of carbon associated with flying. And I just think those things need to be investigated before we jump to what seem like very, very simple solutions.
Okay, so then how do we know that you are truly in support of efforts to limit the destructive carbon-releasing air travel from Bristol? And what will you do to encourage business users not to travel by plane?
Well, I've already made a statement about that and made efforts amongst the networks of mayors. So just a couple of years ago, one of the proposals I put to the C40, which is the global network of cities involved in climate, was could we as a collection of global mayors make a commitment to reduce our air miles by 50%? That was just before everyone went to Copenhagen for the C40 summit. So our commitment on reducing carbon emissions is absolutely there. I just think that we do have to just explore that question about could we better use the existing network of airports. At the moment, people drive down from Manchester to London, as well, long miles to fly it from there. We got about 167,000 tonnes of CO2 associated with people driving past Bristol Airport to drive to the southeast. So I'll support any blocks on expansion if it can be done without ruling out the possibility of better managing existing air travel. And I think with a growing global population and growing global migration, the pressure will be for more flights. But we'll campaign against more flights. But if we don't win that campaign for more flights, we have to think about the use of our airports as a resource.
Okay, and would you consider a rail link to the airport? Do you think that's the right thing to do at the moment, or is that...
To Bristol Airport?
To Bristol Airport, yes.
Well, I think while it's there, we have to minimise the harm that the air travel takes, and making sure that it's on a public transport network rather than just a private car network as it is at the moment is one of the ways that we can reduce the impact that people flying has on not just this part of the world but on the planet.
Okay, Sandy, I know you've spoken out about this. What are your thoughts on the airport expansion, and what would you do as mayor?
Yeah, so Marvin is right that it's not a decision for Bristol City Council or the Mayor to make, but the Mayor can have an opinion on that will be listened to by the Secretary of State about the expansion. So I'm against the expansion of the airport, but just to be clear, I'm not against flying. I've flown myself. It's there is 10 years of expansion capacity already within Bristol Airport, and I think it sends by stopping further expansion at this point, it sends a very clear message to the aviation industry that they need to look seriously, maybe even at some of the things that the Mayor talked about, but new technologies, hydrogen technologies and all of those sorts of things. But if we say, no, you can carry on expanding your airport as it is, but please do look a little bit at these alternatives, then that doesn't send a clear enough message that this really is an emergency. So we do have to stop the expansion of Bristol Airport for now and force the airlines and the airport companies to look at alternatives and how we reduce the potentially extra 1 million tonnes of carbon that would go into our atmosphere each year after the airport expanded.
Okay, so a clear message may be you saying, as mayor, I'm going to give up flying. Would any of you consider that?
I have done.
You have done? You have flied, or you've said you're not going to fly anymore?
I've said I'm not going to fly.
Okay, do you want to explain your decision and what your position on the airport expansion would be?
Because I'm an environmentalist. As I've said before, I've got an electric car, EV panels, and my wife and I decided about 18 months ago that we wouldn't fly anymore. Not for leisure. I mean, if I was mayor, I may have to fly, if I've got to go to some conference or other. But as far as leisure flying is concerned, now the issue is that not allowing the expansion of Bristol Airport will not stop people flying. We've got to do something more. We've talked about behavioural change, and there's the odd people like me and my wife and others that we know, but most of our friends won't stop flying. Most of the people I speak to, most of the young people still want to go skiing in the winter. They want to do this and that. So how do we do it? The only way is to say it's going to cost you an awful lot. The cost of the CO2 going into the atmosphere on that aircraft, you have to pay to get that out again. We've got to look at that with all our industries, is if we are producing CO2, then we must pay to reduce it. Now, hopefully, eventually, we'll have planes that are flown by hydrogen or battery power or something else. It's not the travel that's the problem, it's the pollution that it causes. And I think the expansion of the airport is a symbolic gesture. It won't change anything. If people can't fly from Bristol Airport, they'll go to Cardiff, or they'll go to Exeter, or they'll go somewhere else. So, for me, whether it expands or not is not a worry.
Surely it sends a message nationally. They're considering airport expansion in Southampton. That would send a message if Bristol said, we're not going to expand.
Yeah, but you say it sends a message nationally. We've got to send a message to people who fly that it's, and they're not listening to those messages. It will just make it more uncomfortable for them to fly, or they'll go somewhere else to do it. That message needs to get home through legislation, through central government, by saying, this is not a good thing to do, to keep flying. Perhaps we have to reduce to say, and most of the people I know pledge, they might say, I'll fly once a year instead of 3 or 4 times on a holiday. Now, that is the way we've got to get that change, but it won't come just by exhorting people not to fly or giving them a smaller lounge to sit in so they haven't got a seat while they're waiting. That's not going to happen.
Caroline, your position on flying and the Bristol Airport expansion?
Well, my personal position is no net increase in aviation. Like Marvin said, and like you just touched on, there is a problem with people, if they can't fly from their local airport, will just travel down the M4 to Heathrow and fly from there. And if I have to fly from business and I can't get a flight from Bristol, then that's what I'd have to do. I'd have to go. And it's pointless. You're not actually then reducing the amount of CO2. You're in fact causing more, because then I'm going to drive to Heathrow, because Heathrow still hasn't got a rail link from the west of England.
Okay, so what will you do as Mayor to incentivise to stop that increase in travel?
We want to have a Green Aviation Innovation Forum. Now, Bristol has got a history of aviation. You want me to talk to the camera? Sorry. Bristol's got a history of aviation innovation. And as I said, we've got the tidal power. We can build a hydrogen plant. What we need to do is join these up. So really challenge the aviation innovation industry that's already here to work on the hydrogen aviation and really lead that. We are, as a party in Bristol, the local Bristol party is against Bristol Airport expansion, but I would say that let's, if we could swap flights, then maybe, but at the moment they don't need to expand because they've actually got enough space.
Okay, thank you. So a question for Sandy now. In relation to your manifesto promise of 200,000 new council homes by 2030, how will you satisfy the need for increased and affordable housing? Sorry, 2,000 new council homes. I realise that.
I'm not doubling the size of the city.
By 2030, how will you satisfy the need for increased and affordable housing, but still conserve our green spaces?
It's a really good question. So I want to build 2,000 new council homes because we have more than that, 13,000 people on the council house waiting list. So these are the most vulnerable people in our city who need a place to call home and need a place to start their lives. So there is sometimes a balance to be had between the green space that we need to build homes and the need to provide housing. Now, I think in Bristol, broadly, we can build on brownfield sites, so old industrial sites and sites that have been built on before. But we will review the local plan that looks at all of the spaces in the city and make sure that any green space that we do have, we see what we call a net gain in biodiversity. So any place, any site that is built on, we have to see an improvement in the biodiversity, the wildlife in that area, the amenity in that area when any development is made, and that would include council housing or private homes.
Okay, Alistair, would you like to tell us what you think about balancing the need for green spaces while also providing sustainable homes?
I mean, I think green spaces are absolutely necessary for good mental health, good physical health, and the health of the city. And also to reduce carbon. We need those green spaces. We're not going to build over those green spaces. We must keep as much as we can. So there are quite a lot of brownfield sites still available in the city. We need to unlock those. We need to make sure that those are built on and do our very best to conserve as much green space as possible, because, you know, what has brought us through this pandemic in some ways is getting out back into nature. You know, we do not want to destroy that nature by building over it. So, you know, we have to look at that.
Okay, Caroline, same question. How will you balance the need for increased and affordable housing with the need for green spaces?
Obviously, we know that green spaces are absolutely vital for people's health and well-being, and we want to protect them. There are, as the others have said, brownfield sites that we can build on. We can also retrofit older buildings. It's actually greener and cheaper to retrofit old buildings than it is to demolish them and rebuild. So there's quite a lot we could do there, and you can actually, there is a company in France doing it, and they've done it in Paris, and they actually managed to do it and put in green balconies, green roof gardens, and make the spaces much more nice to live in. I was trying to think of a posh word. But, they managed to actually do it with the tenants in situ as well. So it is possible using the right companies who know what they're doing. So, but yeah, we'd be looking at brownfield sites where we could.
Okay, Marvin, same question. How will you balance the need for increase in affordable housing with the need for green spaces?
Yeah, well, you can see it in what we're doing. If you just look at Castle View on the edge of Castle Park, what we're doing around Hengrove, these are homes that are being built. Well, one is on site that's been designated for housing for a long time, so brownfield, particularly if you look at Castle View. Obviously, the conversation we're having in the city now around Western Harbour. But also what we need to do is make sure that our developments actually build biodiversity into them. So Bonington Walk up in Lotley is an award-winning housing scheme. That's net gain biodiversity. I visited the houses, some new homes up in Hartcliffe just the other day, Jessop's Way. And again, there's a nature corridor been built into those homes. But I'd encourage people to actually go and read our Bristol One City ecological strategy that actually sets out a commitment. It's a very challenging commitment, but a commitment for Bristol to move up from about 15% of land being a space for nature to 30%. And at the moment, those are national targets that are being encouraged also. But it does press upon us the need to build more densely and more centrally. And therein is where we actually need really mature political conversations. Because when we do start to bring forward housing, sometimes you get a reaction from people, but we do need to build centrally more densely. That might, in some situations, include height. We're not talking about skyscrapers, but higher density will mean some more height. But if we're not going to support that, then we have to say we have to live with the consequences of that. For example, more sprawl and people living further away. But it's very much tied in with that first answer I gave around how we service the needs of a growing population without bringing unbearable pressure to our transport system as well. So many of the challenges we face are interconnected.
But isn't there a site you're currently building on in Lawrence Weston that's greenfield site? And also, what do you say in response to the it's the M32 or M42 maple trees that got cut in?
The M32.
M32.
So the M32 maples is again, it's an example of where something gets on social media is not properly understood or a campaign is misrepresented. So the fact is that the site was given planning permission for student accommodation and offices back in 2014, 2015. No objection was raised by the councillors at that time to that planning permission being given. So the owner of the land has planning permission, and that includes a £23,000 to plant new trees and remove the existing trees. A housing association came along with our support and said, don't build student accommodation and offices, let's build affordable homes. So we had an option of 26 to 32 affordable homes, which is an issue of critical importance in Ashley because it's an area that's being gentrified quite rapidly. So the property developer agreed. Now, the only option on the table there was, are you going to have affordable homes or student accommodation? Because he owned the land and he had permission, it was never to keep the trees. The warning we gave to the campaign was, if you stop the planning permission for the affordable homes, we will lose the affordable homes and the trees will go anyway. And ultimately, the planning permission was denied because of the pressure. We lost the trees, and what we have now is offices and student accommodation, which is the worst possible outcome for the community. But, you know, it's a complicated world, and that is a situation in which we need to be honest in our campaigning and honest about the issues that present themselves to us.
Okay, Alistair, I heard you express your displeasure for that. What do you say in response to that?
I think it is a complicated world, and we have to do our best, and the mayor has to do his best to whoever that might be out of the four of us, or the 9 if you count the others. You know what we're going to be able to do. We have to take those decisions. There will always be somebody who doesn't want a development somewhere, and there will always be people who want that development. You know, I've been a councillor for 6 years up until a few years ago. And you know, that was the main issues were always, you know, you've got these two contrary views. You know, the mayor and the council is there to reconcile those. And I think at the moment, having a mayor who is omnipotent in that is a weakness of the system at the present time. I think we need to get back to a more democratic system where the councillors and the council can take decisions and can be listened to, whereas this current mayor tends not to listen to councillors or anybody else who wants to give their opinion if it's not something that he actually thinks himself.
Would you like to respond to that, Marvin?
Well, I think historically, people who've been in Bristol for a long time will know that the City Council didn't actually make decisions, which is why we have so much of our infrastructure crumbling around us. But, you know, I'll point to the One City plan when we talk about not listening. For the first time, the city has worked together across ourselves, the health service, business community, trade unions, voluntary community sector, and worked together to write a One City plan that takes us up to 2050. The boards that worked together to develop that plan were not shaped by me, were not directed by me. That is the city coming together to put those ambitions in place, and it gives us a sense of direction. There are 6 boards on it looking at environment, economy, children, homes, transport, health and well-being, and they've worked together to write the story. And I mean, the argument about the mayoral one is interesting because, again, at the heart of it is an opportunity. Is the political leader of the city going to be directly elected by the people of Bristol, or are they going to be chosen by 70 councillors in City Hall? And so I think that you can make a case for going back to that system where the councillors meet in a room and choose the political leader. But we have to be honest about the ups and downs of each of those options. And at the moment, I think there's whether it's a lack of understanding, I'm not sure, but we're not really being fully honest about the limitations of the leader model that has been advocated.
Yeah, it is also worth saying on Alistair's point, there are 9 other candidates, and we would have loved to have them with us today, but I'm afraid due to COVID restrictions, we can only have so many people in the studio. Okay, so the next question is for Sandy. Apart from the points you'd already made, we'd love to hear what you do personally to reduce your environmental impact and what you would encourage others to do.
Ooh, there's a good question. Look, I'm not one for really sort of preaching how people should live their lives. That's not something I'd really want to do, but I do cycle everywhere. So I do have a car, but I rarely use it. Obviously, we recycle. We tend to holiday in this country and love Cornwall and the west coast of Wales. And try to buy local as well. For me, that's one of the key sort of ways that we can tackle climate change and also encourage our economy in the city too. You know, I want to see our local businesses flourishing because they create local jobs and carbon emissions are reduced. So I tend to shop local where I can for all sorts of things, from food to presents and all that sort of stuff. And I want to take that into my policy arena. We want to invest £10 million into, over the next 3 or 4 years, into our local high streets. We want people to go back to their local high streets, to buy local, to get to know their local community. So we really want to spruce up the high streets.
So how are you going to incentivise that then?
Well, so the £10 million would go towards each high street, and I've been to many, from Philwood to Bedminster up to Southmead, and different parts of the city. Everybody has different ideas of what they want to do. Some want pedestrianisation, some say they need a lick of paint, some say they want their potholes filled, some want a festival to bring local people in. So it would really be up to the high streets themselves to decide what they wanted. But the idea being that it brings local people into local shops. That means they're not driving to, across the city to the supermarket, but they're buying local, creating local jobs and reducing emissions.
Okay. Caroline, can you tell us what you do personally to reduce your environmental impact?
I will, but there's one thing I wanted to say before that, which is back to Marvin's point about nothing got done before the mayoral system. And that is that under Barbara Janker, the Lib Dem leader of the council, pre-mayoral system, between 2008 and 2012, more affordable homes were built in Bristol in the worst year than either Marvin or George Ferguson managed in their best year of affordable home building. So that's getting nothing done. So what do I do?
So what do you do personally, yes?
Personally? Recycle.
That's basic.
Yeah, basic, absolute basic. We'd like to bring in plastic recycling, plus soft plastic recycling, because
Yeah,
that's
like
a
Tesco's.
that's a major problem. I have a bike. I have 2 bikes. I'm going to try the e-scooters soon. I tend not to drive into Bristol. If I have to go into Bristol, I will walk. Quite often what I will do is I will walk in, because it's downhill, and then I will either get the bus or I'll get an Uber, which is always an electric Uber, back. And I like walking everywhere, so I quite often will walk to places. I'm sorry, I keep on forgetting.
Don't worry.
You asked the question, so I'm talking to you. What else do I do? Well, I work from home, and I worked from home for quite a long time before COVID. And I think this is actually one of the opportunities that COVID has given us, is forced people to do a lot less commuting. And I think that we can actually carry on with that. A lot of people who were a little bit technophobic before have realised that actually it's not that hard to meet on Zoom. Even the council have managed to do it. So I think it's something that we can take forward as well, is actually keeping our online meetings and not all having to drive somewhere to meet up.
Alistair, same question. What do you do personally? I know you've told us you drive, and you kind of answered this already, but if there's anything else you want to...
Yes, I mean, I kind of tick most of the boxes, although, we're not vegan. We've reduced our meat and dairy intake. We do a lot of Zoom meetings. As I was fully employed until January, when a 2-year contract came to an end, and we started doing more and more of these meetings over Zoom. Whereas, from all across the UK, my team used to come together in various places, and when you think of the carbon footprint of doing that, I still think it's a good idea to meet face to face now and again. I think there is something that you've got to do there. But, just on the flying bit, that's quite totemic, really, because, that is saying I've never been to the West Indies. I'd love to go there. I'm never, in the rest of my life, unless they make hydrogen aircraft, I'm never going to get there. And you've got to say that to yourself. Most people won't. Most people, you ask the question to Sandy, well, how can we get others to do this? They won't. What we've got to do, we've got to make it more expensive, more difficult. We've got to be careful because, of course, the poorer people in society will find this more difficult. I know that I've got an electric car. I can afford it. I know that an electric car is much more expensive than a second-hand diesel. But, somehow we're going to have to get over that and look at how we can ensure that poorer people, maybe can fly once a year. And if you're a frequent flyer, you pay the big carbon tax and you pay a lot more if you do more than one flight. So, there's various things that need to be done, but behavioural change is very difficult, and it's not something most people will buy into.
Okay, Marvin, do you want to tell us briefly as well what you do personally?
Yeah, I mean, I think the last point reflects on something that we haven't touched on today, was actually the diversity of our population. So when we were talking about flying, not everyone flies for entertainment and work. Some people fly because that's where their family is. And we have to think about that global connectivity, particularly, ironically, as we're facing a prospect of 200 million climate-driven migrants by the middle of this century. But we know that global migration is one of the big trends of our time, with a growing population as well. So I think we just have to remember that we talked earlier on about not preaching to people. We have to speak to people, go on a journey with people, but go with them. And the problem, one of the challenges we face is that the costs of life transition could fall disproportionately on the shoulders of lower income people. But for me, what do? Like everyone else, the basics. We recycle, we refill now, which is a big thing in our household, new soap in glass jars and all that type of stuff. I ride a bike or run most places, or walk. That's the way, I tend to get around. But there's something that's deeper beyond this as well, that comes back to the art of city making that we've been working on a lot in the build up to COP. And it's this, that we will not meet the challenges we have to meet by adding up individual behaviours, if that makes sense. It cannot just be about I've got some spare disposable income to be able to shop locally than at the supermarket, right? Because that can actually be a luxury. And that because you've got the money, you can pay a few pennies more to get the locally sourced. We cannot depend on that. This is where we make the argument in the lead up to COP and the billions of pounds we need, that we need to decarbonise the systems that underpin city life. Our energy, the things that you don't even think about, our energy system, if you do throw waste away, how much carbon is used in processing that waste? When you switch your light on, how much carbon is generated by switching that light on? When you move around a city, are you on a biogas bus? So we're not going hydrogen, about twice the price, but our bus network in the city is biogas. We've got 99 on the streets of the city from biodegradable matter. Sorry, I'm talking to you, I should be talking to the camera. So we've got to deal with those underlying systems that kick into play without us even realising it. That's the way we're going to get chapter change. And that's why we make the argument that in the lead up to COP26, what we cannot do is get there and have national politicians making pronouncements without having talked to cities about this 10, 15, 20-year journey of transformation that they're going to have to go on. Retrofitting homes, decarbonising transport systems, decarbonising energy and waste systems. And that's how sophisticated this discussion and this challenge has to get. At the moment, and we've seen today, we've had the announcements with no conversations with the major cities in the UK, which means we're lacking a little bit on how it's going to happen beyond the tweeted headline.
Okay, thank you. We now have a question from online. It's from Holly Finch, and this is for Sandy. And the question is, with COVID restrictions easing, there will be more travel via England's motorways, many of which run through Bristol. This could be detrimental for our wildlife. How will you prevent such problems?
There's a tricky question. I, as Mayor of Bristol, I'm not sure how much impact I can have on how many people use our motorways. But I come back to the points I made before. If we can design our cities so that you don't need to use a car, so that you could come to the arena, for example, easily by train, that you can come to the city centre and enjoy everything that Bristol has to offer by public transport. If people can easily get to their jobs or their conferences or wherever it is that they're going by public transport, then less people will have to use cars and therefore the motorways. So again, repurposing our road building budget and putting it into a new Metrobus system, improving cycle lanes, particularly separate cycle lanes that mean people feel safe door to door rather than having to ride sort of across roundabouts and the like. All of these things will help us to reduce our car use and therefore mean that less people are using our motorways and therefore producing less carbon.
Okay, we've got another question for Caroline from Mary Leonard online. And the question is, would you invest in aviation innovation to make flights more eco-friendly? And would you do this by taking funds from fossil fuels?
Well, we've got in our manifesto that we want to invest in aviation, and we want to invest in aviation innovation. Where the money's going to come from, if we could tax the hell out of fossil fuels, then that would be the best play. Make it, pay to pollute, basically, is where it should come from, I guess.
Okay, question for Alistair now. What will you do to encourage workers and school children to cycle or walk?
I think the way we can encourage people is to give them good facilities, good infrastructure. The thing that puts a lot of people off is, well, two things mainly. One is that they perceive it as being dangerous because they're having to mix with vehicle traffic. And the other bit is that they get somewhere and they can't park their bike securely, so it gets stolen. And Bristol is dreadful for that. I mean, the number of bikes that are stolen is just huge. So, we do have to put in good cycling infrastructure that is separated from traffic. And I think the more we can do that, the more we will get people involved. I mean, I have spoken to a number of cycling groups. There, of course, there is a bit of a cultural thing here as well, that we do have some communities that aren't good at cycling. They don't want to cycle. They find it difficult. maybe because of the, the type of clothes or where they've come from, what their background is. And bringing those people into being cyclists is going to be a real challenge. But first of all, we need to get the infrastructure right. We need to have good cycle ways through the city and good walking tracks as well.
Okay, so now we have a question for everyone, and it'll be for Caroline first. Young people of 16 years old are currently considered old enough to serve in the armed forces, but not mature enough to have their say in government. In light of this, if the voting age was lowered to 16, how do you think this would change the voting patterns? Do you think it would benefit or detract from your party's vote share? And please consider your answers carefully because we will be voting on this at the end. Caroline.
Okay, well, the Lib Dems are very much in favour of votes at 16. It's one of our core policies. We want to change the voting system entirely. We want proportional representation. Unfortunately, both Labour and the Tories have colluded between them to ensure that this doesn't happen because the two-party system suits them. The Tories got 43% of the votes in the 2019 election but came away with an 80-seat majority. The Lib Dems actually increased their share of the vote percentage-wise but lost seats, which doesn't seem very fair. Now, I don't think very many young people will vote for us. I think our votes are much more likely to go with Labour and the Greens, but I firmly believe that 16 and 17-year-olds have very firm ideas about what they want. They're very politically switched on, much more so than a lot of octogenarians. And therefore, I would say, yes, 16 and 17-year-olds should vote.
Okay, Alistair, will you be in support of it? And if you're not, what are you scared of?
I'm very scared of 16-year-olds, but...
We're not that bad.
I think, not all 16 and 17-year-olds are the same. Not all 18-year-olds or 19-year-olds are the same. There are some who are very engaged, but they're probably at the age of 16, 17, politics for 95% of the population of that wouldn't be their first priority. They wouldn't be understanding all the issues. I'm not in favour of reducing the age to 16. Some of that comes from thinking about my own children. Actually, I've got two boys. They're now in their 30s, but I just look back to when they were 16 and 17, and they would admit it themselves. Even though they had a father who was very, very much engaged politically, they weren't. They wouldn't have known what the issues were or what the party stood for.
Neither does my father, who's got Alzheimer's, and he still gets a vote.
Yes, I know, and you can always bring up these anecdotes, and you can always find somebody who's not the norm, and we are generalising now. And if you say, well, 16, what about 14? You could, there's maybe some.
Okay, but in Wales you can now vote from 16.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm only giving my own personal opinion. I don't know what I've never spoken to the Central Conservative Party about their reasons why they've not put it forward. But probably it is because I would suspect, and when I was 16, I think I was a communist. So
Okay.
I think we all get at that age that we do have somewhat of a naive view of how life works, and therefore
I wouldn't necessarily say so. The young people of this country have brought climate change, and if they've held the government accountable. When there's a lack of action, they have spoken up. You've got the Bristol Youth Strike in Bristol and across the country. And they've held the government accountable.
Yes, yeah. And I can say, that there is a proportion of but, then you'd be saying, well, okay, they can and they can't, I just think 18's a reasonable age for actually, getting through some of that teenage years where you're doing other things and meeting friends and making relationships.
Or running a debate. as
I
you do.
know, I know.
Sandy, would you like to give us your thoughts on this?
So look, I mean, the analogy you drew was a really important one, that we allow 16-year-olds to fight for our country, and that's a really important one. If we feel, and I do feel, that 16-year-olds have a right to have a say, you know, the decisions we're making now around issues like climate change or housing or transport, you know, they're going to affect you as young people much more than they're going to affect us. So I think we just need to, as the Green Party, we've always been supportive of votes for 16-year-olds. It's really important that young people are engaged early. If you had 16-year-olds voting, they talk about it at school, you discuss it with teachers, you start to get into the habit of voting, which I think many people don't. So votes for 16, I think, are really important. And if we trust young people to fight for our country, we should trust that they can vote as well.
Okay, Marvin, your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I support votes for 16. There are a whole bunch of reasons, but I'll just pick a couple out. One is the younger our population is, the more diverse it is as well. Remember, in terms of ethnicity in particular. And so we're bringing a wider range of people from a wider range of backgrounds into the political discussion, which is something that's sadly lacking in a country that is one of the most socially immobile countries in the OECD. So we need those voices in, and I think young people will bring a more progressive voice, a more future-looking voice. I think we do need to accompany it, not just amongst young people, by the way. I think it's with the whole population about improving the quality of our political debate, because I think it's pretty poor. But if we take an actual example, so when we publish the One City Plan every year, we gave our youth mayors, youth council working with Babasa, an opportunity to choose one of the city's top priorities for the year. Over the last 2 years, the first top priority out of the top 3 for the city they chose in last year was mass transit system. Not something of immediate gratification, but they wanted us to continue with that journey of investing in how we are going to have a chapter change in the public transport offering to our city. Now, I wish people 10 years ago, 20, 30 years ago had that kind of foresight to prioritise planning for the future, but they put that on the agenda. This year, they chose COP, how we prepare as a city for the COP conference in Glasgow in November. Again, you know, visionary, very progressive, on the world stage, taking really serious issues. So I think it's certainly in Bristol, and I suspect around the country, they've shown themselves both willing and able to really prioritise the issues that matter, not just to them as individuals, but to us as a country and to the planet.
Okay, so now you've experienced how passionate and informed 16 and 17-year-olds are about climate change and the ecological crises. We'd now like to, just so we can remind people, could you raise your hand, please, if you're in support of lowering the voting age? Thank you very much. Okay, so thank you so much for coming, and thank you also for Pitch for lending us their studio. We also want to say a massive thank you to our amazing volunteers at Avon Schools Eco Network. They volunteer their time for us for free in helping us learn to do skills like this. That being said, if you are in a senior school in the Avon area, or you are a teacher and would like to get your pupils involved in this network, please contact us at avonschoolseconetwork@gmail.com, and we will also post that link in the comments now. Also, if you want to follow us on social media, we're on Instagram, we're on Facebook, and we're on Twitter, and our name is EcoAvon. So good luck to all the candidates, and thank you for coming here tonight. Have a wonderful evening, everyone, and good night. Cool, we good?